Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Joellen Peters. Lovely to see you, Joellen. It's been a while, but I'm really looking forward to our chat today.
Yeah, good to see you too, Simon. I am looking forward to it as well.
So, a fellow adoptee and also a therapist. Yeah.
Yes.
So this question then that I sometimes love to start with in terms of what comes to your mind when you hear this, the name of the podcast, Thriving Adoptees. What comes to mind for you, Joellen?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is this idea of thriving, and which is something I love to focus on just in my own life and with people I work with, adopted or not, is let's get beyond surviving. A lot of times when people come to work with me, and many adoptees are in survival mode. And so getting beyond that and actually thriving is important. And I couldn't help but look up the definition of thrive, which, is, I'm sure other people have done, which is to grow well or to prosper. And so thinking about, what are the things that I have either experienced in my life or with the people that I've worked with that have helped adopted people to grow well or prosper. And so that's what I'm talking about today.
Yeah. It came to me on the back of an acronym, right? So I was talking to somebody about, I was listening to a marketing entrepreneur type lady talking about creating an acronym for a program, and I came up with the Thrive. So T was about trauma, H was about healing, R is resilience, I is identity, V is vision for the future, E is empowering others. So that must have lodged somewhere. I spent quite a few days kind of reinventing the sort of content that might be under those headings of the thriving. So I think that's why that's where it came from. That's where it came from, as in terms of a simple way to sum up what it's about. Because this lady was like a branding expert.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it works. Yeah. And can I say, what it made me think of?
Yeah.
The thing that I started to think about, the first word that popped into my head, and then I always feel like I'm working on for myself and working on with other people is not really, thrive is kind of sexy a little, it's like exciting. This word isn't quite as exciting when you say it, but it's capacity. And that was one of the words that came to me is, how do we grow capacity? And capacity is kind of the container of how much you can grow. It's how much growth there can be. It's how much kind of connection there can be. And so I think that's not what I'm always working on with people, is increasing their capacity, helping them understand their capacity, helping them understand how they got to be where they are. And if you are able to increase that, then you will thrive more because you will be growing well more.
Yeah. So do you mean like capacity is like scope? Scope, would that be another word?
I think I mean more like bandwidth.
Okay, bandwidth. Okay.
Yeah. Scope is part of it, but it's like ability to hold.
Yeah.
Kind of. Yeah.
So what's coming to mind off the back of that is this space, and I'm thinking about my first kind of dive into emotional stuff, which was about 16 years ago now, and it was called broadband consciousness.
Okay.
So that sounds like broadband consciousness is about having a bigger bandwidth, right? It's about
that makes sense. Yeah.
And that was a 5-day that was a 5-day like a retreat with 2 course leaders and about 5 or 6 people on it. And this was nothing to do with adoption. This was about, it was about consciousness. It was about scope. And the other thing that's popping into my head off the back of that is it's like the kind of Buddhist stuff, like spaciousness,
mindfulness, spaciousness,
spaciousness. So the amount of space, or the fact that we are that space, we are the space in which our thoughts and feelings and our trauma sits, and our focus tends to be on the content of the space,
right,
rather than the space itself.
Yes, and the process also that's happening in that space.
The process that's happening in that space.
The process of like you talk about consciousness, you can go, okay, I want to grow. You can go, here's my capacity to grow, my bandwidth to grow, to become more conscious. Here's the process I take to become more conscious. Here are the things I do to become more conscious and more aware, to be able to address reality and to really look at what happens for adoptees in their lives, what the losses are, what the traumas are, what the healing is, what, to be able to really look at that and be conscious of it. And I do think that one way that people, and the way that I focus on in my career, that people are able to do all wonderful things, enjoy the world, be vital, feel alive, is by addressing their realities. And I think if we don't address our realities and we push them down or hide them, then we are at risk of not being as vital and thriving as much as we would hope.
So this suppression stuff, I find fascinating, because when it's described as if it is a conscious process. You're like, what? Okay, well, this you give me a look there. Okay, this is the way I've heard it, right? This is the way I've heard it. That, I have suppressed my feelings, right? So no.
Yeah, I see my head shaking. No, I'm not really looking at myself, but I don't think that people necessarily suppress things on their own. I think that that people have parts of themselves that might hold on to things or carry things in a way that they're not consciously aware of. I'll give you just a kind of weirdo story, but when I was 2 years old, I was in a car accident and I fell out of the driver's side of the door. Don't ask how that happens when you're 2 years old. It was crazy. Oh, and in Europe that could happen, but in the United States, we drive on the right. So the 2-year-old shouldn't be in the driver's seat, right? So anyways, I fell out, and 30 years later, 35 years later, I was getting some body work done. And when I had that accident, my left side was run over by the car. It's, horrible. And I survived. Yay. And I'm thriving. Yay. And but when I was on this, it was doing myofascial release work, I rolled over and off the table. And I had as close to what I would call as a flashback to that car accident, and there's the whole book, The Body Keeps the Score, right? So I'm not consciously thinking about my body having memorized that movement in any way, shape, or form, but my body has kept that memory for me. I think, the best as I can make an explanation of why I had a flashback at that moment.
Yeah. Well, The Body Keeps the Score. That title terrifies me. I'm overcooking it, but it's a scary title. The body keeps the score, and the next thing is well, do you know what? And it's going to settle that score, and it's going to, and it's going to jump out. Yeah, well, it's going to jump out.
Yeah.
Like it's like, for some reason, everybody, well, I think the reason is that everybody's trying to, people are trying to get our attention. Marketeers are trying to get our attention. Media are trying to get our attention, because if they don't get our attention, then they will be out of a job, because they won't sell any advertising.
They didn't get enough
newspapers.
Yeah.
And they won't sell any advertising on their websites. So the body keeps the score. We have a negativity in the Western world. We have a negativity bias that runs through our culture, and it's to do with selling us stuff.
Right.
The body keeps the score. I don't know if you've seen this, because someone was telling me, a fellow adoptee was talking about that, reminded me of that book about a year or so ago. And I was thinking, when I think of scores, I think of soccer scores.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, as I was swimming later on that day, I thought, well, what about, where's the story here? Where's the story going here with this body keeps the score? And I came out with a score, which is trauma 1, adoptees united 10.
Who gets 1?
Trauma.
Oh.
Trauma 1, right? So trauma scores first. Adoptees united 10. Adoptees united together. Whether we're working with a therapist who is also an adoptee, whether we're having doing a podcast between 2 adoptees, or we're in a podcast in a face-to-face group, by putting together, then we kind of we beat the trauma, and we beat it kind of hands down. And it seems that's a way of that's my way of lightening this stuff up, because trauma's so dark, and and it becomes like an all-encompassing thing, like it's getting darker and darker, and a bit of humor tends to lighten stuff up a bit.
Yes, yeah. And I think that there are the very conscious ways we repress that, right? Like you're talking about, this is a conscious way you kind of like, I'm putting that over here, right? I'm gonna, but I think there are and I'm trained more psychoanalytically, so the more, the unconscious ways that happens, that your body might take on that. But you also have the capacity to heal that, to seek out services, hope, if you're lucky, I guess you have the capacity to do that, to find, someone, and most adoption therapists I know do extremely large sliding scale things that, and are very supportive of the people they work with in that way.
So on your website, and as always, listeners, there's links to Joellen's website and socials in the show notes. So if you're driving, you don't need to try and remember it. You talk about looking at neurobiology. I think it mentions like neurobiology. Yes. And recently, I've come across this book by a neuro. And I think he calls himself a neuropsychologist, a guy called Chris Niebauer, American chap. He talks about pre-verbal trauma. He equates pre-verbal trauma to unconscious trauma. Would you say that's a fair?
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. When I think of, one of the things I talk about when I talk about the trauma that adoptees have is that we have a lot of unknown losses of things that we really can't know or quantify. Some of that it's unknown because we're not connected with our genetic history. Some of that is unknown because of this pre-verbal stuff. But there's these researchers, Beebe and Lockman, who did some research on infants. And we know that in the first 15 hours of life, an infant can both distinguish between and prefer its mother's voice, smell, and face, and will recognize and prefer the sound of their mother reading a story over somebody else reading their story in the first day of life, in the first half day of life. What does this mean for adoptees? I don't know. What is the loss of familiarity? What is the loss of preference for a young brain? I really don't know what that means. I'm not sure anybody knows what that means, but it's hard to argue that there wouldn't be some kind of mark for for that child of, oh, that thing I've been with, like I learned my mother's smell when I was in the womb and now it's gone. That it's hard to imagine that somehow that doesn't impact the child.
Yeah.
And the adopted person. I was it's kind of a pretty sad story, but in my part of my family lore is that I cried the first 2 years of my life. Okay. And I was hard, I guess, to have around because I cried the first 2 years of my life. And there were two things. One is my pediatrician told my mom that I just had a sensitive nervous system. I don't know, but I had a sensitive nervous system. And there are colicky babies, right, who are not adopted, but the other kind of horrifying thing is that they were also told every baby needs a good 2-hour cry a day. So they would leave me crying for, 2 hours a day. And that's not recommended anymore.
No.
That's not ideal.
Well,
but
science has its...
But I don't know. Is that because I was grieving? Is that because I was missing this smell, this, and all that? So I don't know.
So the fascinating piece for me is, well, let me ask a question first. So this this neuropsychologist guy is talking about the development of the left brain not starting until we're about 2. Is that's what he contends? Have you heard similar stuff to this, or?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So the left brain is where all our reasoning is, and
right.
Right? So one of, and I mentioned this in the email. One of the things that fascinates me is how what you're describing now, this anguish, for want of a better word, from at our separation.
Yes.
That's an emotional thing. Yeah, that's a whole body. That's a whole. It's
right.
It's not a thought. It's not, as you say. It's pre-verbal. It's pre-conceptual. We haven't got a clue what's going on because we've got no left brain to do that.
Right.
And yet somehow one of the biggest shared things amongst as adoptees is this belief that we're not good enough. So that involves the left brain, and the left brain didn't start till we were 2. It didn't start developing it. So these two things are they causal? Isn't this just what? And this is my speculation, right? Is this just something that a belief? It's a reason that our left brain comes up with stuff to describe what we felt.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. I often talk about the difference between us and other animals that don't have frontal lobes. So if another animal, like if a bird flies into a window and doesn't die, or a dog is grazed by a car and doesn't die, you will see that they will lie down and the bird will flap, and it might squawk, it might make noise, it might sit there and shake, right? It doesn't have a frontal lobe. It's not thinking anything about, oh, I've got to call my insurance company, or, its body, that all that movement and everything, a dog will sit on the side of the road and shake for 20 minutes, and then it'll get up and run off, and it'll be fine. So part of what happens is that our frontal lobes and our thinking as adult human beings, at least, and maybe even children, interferes with our ability to process the trauma that happens in our bodies. So a bird will just, sit there and shake for 20 minutes, and then it'll go up and fly away. A human being will be like, I can't shake. That's weird. I shouldn't cry out. People will look at me. I have to call my insurance, So I think that that's kind of it's looking at it from more of the adult, like what happens in more of an adult brain when a trauma happens. But I think you can see the distinction there between how the lower portions of the brain deal with trauma, and the pre-verbal or nonverbal portions of the brain deal with trauma, and the ones that are verbal and have the ability to reason things out that can, in a way, interfere with the trauma. And yes, I do think that children then, and, or anyone, if most people will, if something doesn't feel right, they're going to start trying to figure out why and what and where and how and what can they do to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the mine's just gone completely blank. I want to take you back to the capacity.
Mm-hmm.
The capacity. So, and this space. So are you talking, and bandwidth, are you talking about the fact that so much of our bandwidth is occupied by the trauma, that we don't have space for other stuff? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably true for adopted people at times and everyone else as well. But yeah, I think that, so when I was thinking of it, I was thinking of capacities, and what gives you capacity is what I started to think about. And one was this idea of addressing reality. And so, yeah, there's trauma there, right? That has to be addressed. But that's part of capacity. But also part of addressing reality is, you might have people in your life who love you. You might have, a talent or a skill that you feel really good about. So there's those parts of self that are known and understood, and the parts that aren't. But all of that is your reality. And addressing that gives you ways to increase your capacity. Your capacity, I think, is also made up of healthy relationships that you have. Your capacity is, one of the things that we talked about last time was, I gave a paper in New York City at the psychoanalytic division of the American Psychological Association a number of years ago. And I kind of riffed off of this term that psychoanalysts use. He called it he defined something called a holding environment. And the holding environment for a kiddo is any aspect, and this is, back when only mothers were raising children, but any aspect of a parent that both kind of literally and figuratively holds the child when they need comfort, or holds them in a state of calm. So, that's literally physically touching the child, cuddling them, cooing at them. For infants, for a toddler, it's going to be both saying, oh, look how amazing you are at that, and giving them hugs and things like that, but also saying, it's also going to contain them. So, oh, I know you want to be Superman, but you can't jump off this balcony, there's that's an older psychological term. And when I was thinking about the paper that I wrote, started thinking about adoptees. Well, that I started thinking for non-adopted people, that there's a portion of that holding environment and that mirroring and validation that they get from that comes from just being genetically related to their parents. And so I kind of just created this term genetic holding environment, or, riffed off of that. And I think other people have used the term, and I don't know if we kind of discovered it at the same time, or if they saw me talk, or, I don't know what happened there, but it seems like if you were a psychoanalyst and studying this, you would eventually come upon thinking about things that way. So the genetic holding environment are those parts of the holding environment that are due to biology, genetics, physical things that are validating and create a sense of an emotional container for people, which increases their capacity. So I'll just give you an example. So when I was growing up, I was in a closed adoption. I knew very little about my biological family, except that she was a 19-year-old girl, and that basically she was a 19-year-old Catholic girl. That's all I really knew. And young woman, I guess. And so when I was a practicing Catholic, that Catholic part was kind of important to my identity, right? And when thinking that she was 19, as I was growing up, I was aging her along with me, right? So I thought she was going to be about 20 years older than me, right? And so that was part of that was the only genetic holding environment I had, right? Was that story. Well, it ends up it was wrong, so that sucks, right? So she was actually 40. So no, she was 30 when she had me. So, it just kind of changed my story. I mean, part of my story was an expectation that if I ever found my biological mother, she would be around a lot longer than my adoptive parents. And, she was actually just like a year younger than them.
Yeah.
So she was not going to be around much longer. So that thinking, I'm going to have this biological mom who might be around longer than the rest of my family, was a comfort to me. That gave me more capacity, even though it was stupidly wrong.
Yeah.
Or criminally wrong, really, that they lied to my parents about that. Yeah.
Do you recall crying all the time when you were?
No. I'm not, I don't have a lot of memories from my childhood. There were some ways that my adopted family was a good fit, and then there's some ways that they were kind of emotionally unavailable. So yeah, and I really kind of, I don't know, my memories are very bound by emotions, and and that's how I kind of track things. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have many adoption related memories at all, or thinking about it, apart from just one question that my sister asked me. So she was adopted from a different family.
Mm-hmm.
And she asked me, do you ever think about finding your real mum and dad? And I said, no, mum and dad are our real mum and dad. And that's the only thing that I can recall. And like you, when you were saying about clinging on to this idea that your birth mother was going to be around longer than your adopted parents, that's the thing that was going through my mind, that I kind of held on to that.
Right.
So what about later on in life, in teens, and did you come out of the fog? Is this phrase that we use, or
Yeah. I don't know. I was such like a serious child. Like if you see my baby picture, I'm just like, it's like the most serious looking 2-year-old you've ever seen in your life. I guess I had just finished crying, or after or something like that. They finally could get a picture of me not crying. So I don't know if I was ever in the fog. I don't know if I ever idealized adoption. My parents were not, they didn't idealize adoption. They didn't buy the whole thing, in terms of like, this is the most, amazing thing that we got to have you, and you're our sweet little baby girl. I mean, I was my father's spoiled brat baby daughter for sure. But, but it wasn't like, we've saved you from anything, or, they were pretty level-headed about it. So I'd never had a, like, oh, I have the best parents ever, or, and they weren't. And that was clear, to me from a pretty young age too. So, yeah, that was not really my experience, but I did, when I was, let's see, my husband and I were having troubles with infertility. And so at that point, I had this like, oh my God, I could go through my life and not be genetically connected to anybody. And that was unfathomable to me. And that's when I started looking. So I was about 30 something.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little under 30, I think. Yeah.
But I'm making an assumption here, maybe way off, right? But I'm thinking that you became a therapist to you got interested in psychology to understand yourself, and then became was that the path, or?
I think that's probably what piqued my interest. I was a chemistry major in college, and was really on that path. And then, to me, maybe, I mean, yes, there was some of that, but I took a developmental psychology class. And so I did become interested in infant and child development. And I had a really wonderful advisor, and who is a friend of mine to this day. And so I think that it was more about that relationship. I had not, my parents were not, I say my mom loved me fiercely, but she had a really hard time validating me for who I was. And so I would teachers or coaches or groups, sport, athletic groups that I participated in kind of became my groups that validated me. And so when I had this lovely teacher, who was helping me with this, with because I ended up being a TA and doing research with her and all this stuff. So she really, she saw my intellectual ability, and she really supported it, and was like, you need to go to grad school and you need to get a PhD. And I don't know if my parents kind of wanted me to be a medical doctor, but they didn't get the PhD route. They didn't understand it. So yeah. So I think it was more about the relationship. And there's been a lot of self-discovery along the way, for sure. Yeah.
So do you recall conscious adoption what we'd call adoption trauma?
Yeah, it's very interesting. All of the adoption trauma that I experienced was what would be called nice stuff. So which I think is what a lot of adoptees experience, is this disconnect between like, oh, someone's saying something really nice to me, but it doesn't land in my heart as making sense, right? And that's what most of mine was. I wasn't teased. My older brother was adopted, so it was just part of our family. But it was things like, you look so much like your dad. And my dad was overweight and bald. And I was just like, ugh, I don't want to look like my dad, And so it was just like, it was just like this, like, ugh, yuck. And I had, and people would say I look like my mom. My mom is, my adopted mom is Irish Catholic. She's deceased now. And when she was younger, she had jet black hair, super white skin, and blue eyes. Okay. Like I look nothing like her. And as she got older, she dyed her hair, lightened her hair or whatever when it started to go gray. But she was 5'2". I'm 5'7". And people would, once I became an adult, all the time, people would see her like on my college campus and say, you have to be Joellen's mom. And it's like, what? That's sweet, right? That's nice. But I was like, I don't look anything like her. So that was kind of my trauma, was just like, where do I fit in? Who am I? Mean, my trauma was about fitting in. No, there's more trauma there too, about fitting in. Like there was a lot of not getting on with my mom, basically.
Not getting on with
my mom.
Your mom, okay.
That was definitely the other adoption. That was probably that was 100% the bigger adoption trauma, Simon.
Yeah. And did that change over time?
It did. Kind of ironically, it changed when I found my birth parents. Yeah, so I found my birth parents. They were married, so that was not what was expected. And my adopted dad had just died about a year before. And my adopted dad died. The same week he died, I got my non-identifying information from the state of Ohio. And in that, we found out that my birth mom was 30 and having an affair with a married man. And she wasn't Catholic, she was Protestant, God forbid. So anyway, I had to like sit my mom down 3 days after my dad died and be like, everything you were told was a lie. And hence everything you told me was inaccurate. And she, it was just a weird time for both of us. And then about a year later, I found my birth parents and they were married, which was not expected because she
was having an
affair. Was having an affair with this married man who ended up divorcing his wife, and they got married. So your question was, what was your question again?
Well, my question was, did your relationship with your mom change?
So anyway, my mom told my aunt after I called her up and said, hey, sit down, I found Martha, they are married, she's married to my birth father. My aunt called me later on in the day and told me that my mom said that was her worst nightmare come true. And I was like, oh, thanks for telling me that, Aunt Joan. I don't think so my mom and her sister talked, and my mom told her, Joellen found her birth mother and she's married to her birth father, and it's my mom's worst nightmare come true. So, I was just upset by that, of course, and also didn't really think that it was, I didn't know what was going to happen, but I didn't really think I was going to abandon my mom and, become the child of these people I don't know. But anyway, when I talked to my mom about 3 or 4 months later, she and I were out for a walk, and she said, well, when you first told me that you found Martha and David and they were married, I thought it was my worst nightmare come true. And then she said, and now I realize it's the best thing that could have happened for you. So that was a real generosity that, like she was able to open her heart, and our relationship improved quite a bit during that time period.
Yeah. So, because you mentioned earlier on that she was emotionally unavailable, I think, or your adopted parents were emotionally unavailable, and then she did become.
Yeah. She was. Yeah, and I think in some ways, I want to say that's the legacy of secrecy and shame around closed records and around not having open adoptions, is that if you don't know what it is that's out there, it's too terrifying to even look at, right? That's about her capacity, but it applies to us as adoptees as well. It's like she was able to thrive more when she was able to really address the reality rather than what her fantasies were, right? And I have also been able to thrive more because I understand more. Now I do have a genetic holding environment. I have 4 half siblings. I have a birth mother. My birth father's died since my birth mother's still living. She's almost 98. And no, 80, 88, 89. She's old. She lives by herself. And I have a cousin on her side of the family that I'm super close to. So I have that more of a genetic holding environment that also has given me way more capacity. And not all those relationships are great, but it's information I have that I didn't have before.
Yeah. So the other thing that you mentioned that you were aware of growing up was the fact was not fitting in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when did you kind of become aware of that? Was it a teen thing, or was that before or afterwards, or?
No conscious memory of that becoming a reality. It just seemed always to be there.
Always the same.
Yeah. That's the part I'm talking about like not like, was I ever in a fog? I don't know. I always just carried that around with me.
Yeah.
You
were always out of that. So how did that start to change, or when did that start to change? Oh, has it changed? I mean,
the part of not fitting in with my adoptive family.
Sorry, I thought it was broader than your adoptive family.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Sorry. I just it's changed to some degree. I think it's like cultivating a compassion for that part of me that doesn't feel like I fit in, and recognizing, I mean, is that ever going to go away? I'm not counting on that. I've had tons of therapy. I've done a lot of work. I've done a lot of therapy. I've done a lot of advocacy work. Am I ever going to feel like I, completely 100% fit in? I don't think so. And that's that part of this piece I'm talking about addressing reality. The reality is that it's just the truth. There's something about me that's very like my adoptive mom. When I go see her sister and my cousin, they're like, it's like having Colette here. And I'm just like, okay. And then I go visit my biological and biological family, and they're like, it's you and Martha are just alike, or you and David, it's like the reality is the Hall of Mirrors, which it's something I like to talk about. Is that I think part of such a big challenge for adopted people is that, what a Hall of Mirror is, it gets distorted, and it's really hard to hold your identity fast and solid when you shift and you look at it from a different perspective, and kind of everything changes, if that makes sense. Things change. And this relates to fitting in, because I think if I felt like if I you're doing a therapy session with me, Simon. If I felt
I don't know anything about this. This is why we're trying to mine your wisdom from that.
Yeah, this is fun. And this is a part of me that, how well defined is it? But there's something there about what, not quite fitting into my adoptive family, not quite fitting into my biological family, but embracing that, right? And that I might even look or seem or be a little different depending on who I'm around, which everyone has that, everyone has that experience. Like, oh, with this group of people, I'm outgoing. With this group of people, they think I am really smart, or, but it's adoption really puts into focus or highlights that struggle that humans have of where do I fit in and how do I fit in. And for me, it is definitely still something that I'm aware of, but it's less of a struggle, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think for me, what you're summing up is it's being less bothered by not fitting in. So you can you can think, we can think of a number of different things. So, like A, B, C, or D. Like I don't fit in. There's I don't fit in, and I don't fit in. Like
Sure,
there's,
sure. Yeah.
there's an acceptance of it. And that is the key. I mean, in fact, I'm not that book that I mentioned earlier on by this guy Chris Niebauer. It's something like how brain science is catching up with Buddhism, right? So Buddhism had it right first, according to this guy, right? He's a hardcore neurobiologist guy, so but it is all about accepting. And so instead of fighting our emotions or fighting the fact that we don't fit in, you went a stage forward. So there's an end. There's an end to the fight, and then you're talking about going even further. You're talking about embracing it.
Yeah.
You're talking about embracing it. So instead of so you've got I don't fit in, and that's a great thing.
Yeah.
So we are no longer arguing with what is. We are no longer resisting what is. We are no longer trying to put that, like that little lad in is it in Amsterdam, tried to put the finger in the dam to stop water coming through, right? And we had this guy in English history called King Canute, right? King Canute was around the time of the Norman conquest, so it's like 1066. It's around that time, right? And King Canute tried to hold back the waves, right? So what we resist persists, as they say.
Right. It's still there. Yeah.
But you're instead of resisting it, so you can resist it, you can accept it, or you can embrace it. There's a scale of, we're on a scale here, and what we're trying to do, it comes back to that numbing stuff, right? So if we're trying to resist it, if subconsciously, whatever it is, we're trying to resist it rather than letting it in, and that goes back to the capacity thing. Like, we are the space for all this stuff.
Yes, that's exactly where I was going. Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking.
Yeah, we are the space for it. So we are no longer identifying with our trauma. We are the space in which that trauma appears.
Yes, and if you can accept that and love that and embrace that part of yourself, and not like I do this all the time, I'm just saying, like, when in those moments when you can do that, like you said, you can push it down, but if you're spending energy pushing it down, your capacity is lower. If you're accepting, that's great. You have a lot more capacity if you're accepting, but if you're embracing, you can actually use it to go, oh, I kind of have this skill of being able to be semi-comfortable in a place where I don't really fit in. And then that allows me to go into, like, I'll just think of an example. I do advocacy work. I'm trying to get adult adoptees in Texas access to their original birth certificates. I know nothing about politics. I mean, I don't know a lot, I don't know how it works. I didn't. Now I know a lot more than I used to. But when I started this, I knew nothing. But I was kind of comfortable knowing nothing and knowing I know nothing. I was just like, okay, here I go. I'm this psychologist, adopted person going into a legislator's office and trying to learn I can figure out how to talk about policy. That's easy, but to learn the politics is way trickier, and to be comfortable in the space of unknowing. So using the I don't quite fit in as a way to advocate for other adoptees or to go into other spaces, that's where I talk about, and you're saying the same thing. We're talking about how if you are able to address the reality and work on it, do whatever you need to do with it, you increase your capacity and your bandwidth.
Yeah.
And then you're thriving, right? Like then that's
thriving, yeah. And the other thing that came into my head as you were talking just then was about this. It's an adoptee superpower, right?
Right.
Do you know, like, so there's, we've had Lorraine on the she's from Oklahoma, I think. I don't know, I can't remember. Sorry, Lorraine, I can't remember which state you're from. But she's got this group called Adopted Chameleons. So you could say, well, I want a choice. On one hand, you could say, I don't fit in, so I have to adapt myself to fit in, and that's really a bad thing. Or you could say, I don't fit in, so I figure out how I can rub along with these people better so that I can get what I want to get.
Right.
Like the adoption records open. So it's a choice. It's a choice of how we see our stuff. It's a choice of how we see our stuff. Is this a good thing?
Yes.
Or is this a bad thing? And as I'm saying this, I'm having a flashback to something that happened with my dad. My adopted dad. So something like 18 years ago, and I went to him with a business problem because I'd taken over the business after he'd retired, and he wouldn't. So I went to him for some advice. He suggested something. I said, no, that's not going to work for X, Y, Z reasons. And then so we went on to some other reasons, and then he brought the same idea back around, and I howled. That's like, it was, we never spoke about it, but I howled. I just I really got to the end of my tether with this stuff. Yes. So I'm with him and not listening, so. Right. And I don't know what that's got to do with where we were, but what we're talking about. But it's something that popped up for me. I guess it was really it was the difference between theory and practice, right? So when you we get a newspaper on a Saturday and a Sunday, and in the Saturday section there's always some kind of self-helpy stuff, and it's written by some expert, and it all makes perfect sense, right? It all makes perfect sense. But but nobody does it, right? Because we've got X percent of the people. So sometimes it's often about nutrition and eating. It's not just sort of emotion, it's holistic well-being with physical stuff and what we eat and all that sort of malarkey and exercise, right? So it makes perfect sense. It makes absolutely perfect sense. And people have been reading that stuff forever, but they don't change, right? We still have the obesity numbers are going up, or so there's a difference between theory and practice. In theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is, which is why. And I think I was just giving myself, I was sharing an example there, which was about stuff. Simon loses his rag too sometimes.
Loses his right to what?
Loses his rag. Spits his dummy out. Loses it. Goes off. Because I think I was sounding. I think maybe I thought I was sounding a bit. I don't know. Too good to be true. So. The other thing that, as you're talking about not fitting in with two, within either. The other metaphor that came to my head was being comfortable in no man's land. Yeah, so First World War, no man's land, right?
Yes,
like,
yes,
like no woman's land, no
right.
person's land,
I'm okay with it.
no non-binary, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But and I heard that once from a transracial adoptee that we had on the show, who was, I think, born in Hong Kong, raised in the UK. And she felt that it was like pick and mix, right? So she could pick which bit she was going to play to. She had the choice. Right? So she had the choice.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm talking about when I say that hall of mirrors. It's like, well, this is who I am, but if I shift my perspective this way, I could have been raised by somebody else, and then who would I have been? And my hand came up. And then if I shift myself this way, this is who I am, or this is who I could have been, or it's very confusing for the identity. It is a shifting ground of identity, and it is it's hard to feel solid in that. And most of my training has been in a theory called self-psychology. So I've been really interested in the self and how people develop their sense of self. So particularly for adoptees, that's really an interesting conundrum, but I think it's that, being able to thrive given all the unknowns. We don't, there's a lot of stuff we don't really know.
So going back to the things that we're talking about in terms of accepting, well, not rejecting this scale, right? From intense rejection to some rejection, to acceptance, to embracing, to embracing with wild abandon. That's at the other end of the scale.
That's the high end of the scale.
That's the high end of the scale. What came to my mind was that the name of this book, another book that I've finished last month, called No Bad Parts.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I'm reading a book about parts right now too. Yes.
Yeah. So No Bad Parts is written by a guy called Richard Schwartz, American guy called Richard Schwartz. I'm doing this.
Okay, so this is his other. I'm reading his other book right now. You are the one you've been waiting for.
Ah, right. You are the one. Yeah.
It's about couples. It's about parts and couples. Yeah.
But okay, so what? Have you read the other one? Have you read the?
I know I haven't read No Bad Parts, but yeah.
But you're familiar with his concept of uppercase S self.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So can you? Because I've only just read about it. I can't put it.
Yeah, I would say I'm just starting to get into reading his stuff, and it's one of these things where people for years have been saying, Joellen, you really need to read the internal family system stuff, which is what he's writing about, and I've been like, no, I'm doing my EMDR training, and no, I'm doing my emotionally focused couples therapy training. So I think this is going to be my next frontier in terms of understanding humans. And what was your question? It was about.
So can you explain what the uppercase S self is?
Okay, so the uppercase S self, and I'm just going to completely cheat because I think I have it up on my computer screen as we're talking about this. Let me find. Oh no, that's not it. Darn it. So the and I had it printed out yesterday too. The uppercase self is the core self, or some people might call it the wise self or the mindful self. It's, there's different kind of the true self. And it is the part, as we've been talking today, we've been talking about, the part of you that might feel like it doesn't fit in, that you kind of work with until you either accept it or embrace it, right? Or the part of you that gets really angry that you're not being seen, that part of you. And sometimes that part of you can be helpful, and sometimes that part of you hurts relationships, right? And so the self is the part of you that is able to stand back and consider all of the other stuff that's going on and look at, hey, what does it feel like to not fit in? And when that self, I am going to pull this up because it's just, okay. It's, does he write about the magical kitchen?
No.
In that book?
Whilst you're looking it up, I'll just riff a little bit and join a few dots together for my take on it, right?
Yeah.
Whether your take on it, and hopefully we'll get to a better one of those takes, one of those sentences, descriptions, definitions, metaphors will land for you, listener. So the uppercase S self is the diamond of the Thriving Adoptees podcast logo. Okay, so it's the diamond. That's the reason for the diamond. The diamond is hidden in the tree.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
The uppercase S self is the space or the consciousness that is or capacity, to use your word, I think, the capacity for our trauma. So it's people, some people call it consciousness, some people call it awareness. So it's the one that is aware of the other parts of self. So if I think about me not fitting in, where I saw not fitting in was when I went to college. When I went to college went from home away to, we call it university, you call it college.
Yep.
The kids, other kids there had either gone to a boarding school, a private boarding school, right? And they were we call them rugger buggers, like Eton guys, like Boris, all that sort of, So the people that I met were either private boarding school people or kids that had gone to a state school, right? I had gone to a private school that was a day school, so I didn't fit in with either of those, right? So the uppercase S self is the one that's aware of the Simon who thinks he doesn't fit in.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And Richard, so have you got your?
Yes, I do. So I've got this nifty diagram, and I'll send it to you afterwards. But so he has, and I'm assuming this is his uppercase self, because that's not how it's referred to in the book I'm reading right now, but it's kind of the core or center of the person. And when it's differentiated, it can be an active, compassionate leader. And then he has some words to describe it: calm, curious, compassionate, connected, confident, creative, courage, and clarity. So there's a lot of alliteration there. And then in self-psychology, my analogy in or not really analogy, but the thing that in self-psychology is the self is this abiding sense of a core set of kind of personhood, values, skills, talents, that sense of who you are that abides over time, that it's like this thread of connection throughout your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a thread that goes throughout your life. Yeah, I think that's the better, this sense, this basic core sense of who you are as a person. And in self-psychology, kind of things happen in your life that get you off maybe of or away from that core sense of self, right? And I think Schwartz would say that then you create different parts, that's when different parts are created to cope with however you have gotten off of and away from that core sense of self.
Yeah. And one of the adoptees who's been on the show a few times, Emma Stevens, her book is a great book about her parts, and so she looks at her parts at different ages. And it's called, I think the book is called The Gathering Place. I will put a link into the
I've heard.
I'll put a link in the show notes to Emma's interview when she talks about this. But she has the gathering place is where she brings all those parts together, and she kind of she parents that she, as the uppercase S, she is parenting all those parts. This is why it's called internal family systems. So she's parenting all those parts, and she is loving, respecting, hearing, and just doting on and reassuring all of those parts, because there are no bad parts. So we accept that part of us in that time was doing the best that part could do.
Absolutely.
We reassure them, and and the reason that we're doing this is because our adoptive parents might not have been there for us, right? So you talked about emotionally unavailable mother, right? So we've got to parent ourselves in the absence of great parenting from emotionally unavailable or unempathetic parents.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And in the I don't know if he talks about this in his other book, but and I particularly like the way he says it, that there are kind of three ways, probably more, but he identifies three ways that parents can be unavailable. One is they can be kind of living through their children. And so like, you know, whatever you do is a reflection on me. So therefore you have to be perfect. I play football, you have to play football. And I'm talking European football for you. When, you know, if I was good at singing, you have to be good at singing or whatever. And, you know, you can see how that could go really wrong in an adopted family, right? If there's not shared genetic interests, or which I do believe exists.
Living vicariously.
Right, living vicariously through, you know, so that's one way that these other selves can be created to deal with that. The second thing is if the parent is, you know, neglectful, abusive, physically or verbally, like that there's, you know, that can be another clear way where people create, you know, have to create other parts of themselves in order to cope and manage and do the best they can. And then the third thing that he talked about, which I thought was, I've never seen anyone talk about, but I've thought about a lot, though I love the way he worded it, is unintentional things happen. Like you're adopted into a family and there's 3 adopted kids and one of them is really struggling, and that your parents just don't have the ability, like they just don't have the ability to give you what you need. Or one of the kids is doing really great and you feel inadequate compared to them, or, you know, so those are, so I thought that was a really, and then that child needs to develop a way to parent themselves, you know, to manage those feelings, right? Yeah. But it's so funny you ended up here and brought this up, because I'm just, like I said, I'm just in the past, you know, 4 or 5 weeks starting to really read about this and study. So I didn't want to include it, but it is so related to that addressing reality, you know, that I've been talking about. Part of capacity is really addressing what your reality is. And as we develop throughout our life, and especially as adoptees, there's probably, very likely, parts of ourselves that we have to create or use in order to survive that situation, right? But in order to thrive, I do think we need to learn how to parent those parts and love them and accept them, and then they're all right, they're all welcome, you know.
Yeah. So your word embrace really works well for this metaphor, because you're
Yes,
embracing, the younger selves. You're actually
yes,
putting your
yes.
arms around them.
Yes, and the manager, you're embracing everybody, you're embracing the assholes too, right? The parts inside of you that are mean or, critical or controlling, or, I mean, at least I have some of those, that I'm
Oh, I don't have
embracing.
any. No, I'm fine.
Yeah, that's good. You're off the hook then, Simon. But
That's
embrace, yeah, being able to embrace those parts and go, I love those parts too. They're there for a reason.
Yeah.
And being able to channel intense energy, that is rooted in justifiable anger, in my legislative efforts is really important, right? To be able to do that in an adult way, and right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another, justifiable anger. That's a whole new, that's a second subject. We can look at that next.
Yeah, it is. And I did want to, the other thing I want to say about the capital S self is that, according to Encounter Family Systems, okay, I don't really know this, but I'm just guessing that you're the healthiest when you are leading from the self. But if you're leading from those parts, then you're at risk. You're at risk of having less capacity, I think. I'm not sure. I'm not sure quite how, I mean, anything racist. I'm not quite sure how I think about this, but
so I came up with this metaphor for the parts and the uppercase S self, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this will only make sense if you have played Trivial Pursuits. You've ever played Trivial Pursuits?
I have played Trivial Pursuit, yes.
Yeah. So you're familiar with the round container that each person, their marker on the board, because it's a board game, is a round, a circular piece of plastic that accepts, that is a receptacle for 6 cheeses, like segments, and they can fit in. So when you get the question right, when you get the pink question right, you get pink cheese, and you put the pink cheese into your cheese holder. And so the uppercase S is the cheese holder.
Yes.
And the parts are the cheeses.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's right. Being able to contain that, and manage that, and know about it, right? You get it because you know about it. You know about it. Yes. You understand. Right. And a cheese holder, a piece of cheese can't win the game on its own, right? You've
got to get all the bits.
Yeah.
You've got to get all 6 bits before the rest do to win the game. But that's the metaphor runs out at that point, obviously.
Right.
It's not. There's only one winner in Trivial Pursuits, and we want every adoptee to be a winner. No losers.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I like in this couples therapy book, You Are the One That You've Been Waiting For. He talks about leading with yourself rather than with your parts. And so I'll just make up an example. So I think I told you I delayed this because some tough things were going on in my life. One of them is that our pet dog died. Okay. So, and you have your sweet dog pillow behind you, right? So if I had come onto the meeting and burst into tears and said, I can't do this, I have to go, that would be the grieving part of me leading, right? Which is okay. But it would be better received if I said, I'm finding myself getting really upset because the part of me that just lost my dog is still grieving, and I see that pillow. And you can just see how differently that lands, right? And that would be experienced by the people around you. So the first, if you're able to say there's this part of me that is, talking to me right now, it's, so, and I think that's kind of what I was saying about I carry around this part of me that feels like it doesn't fit in, right? Sometimes it's very activated and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just fine. But the fact that I can acknowledge it and look at it and love it and totally understand where it came from makes it less threatening for me, makes me able to lead with myself rather than that part. And when that part does get triggered and I'm leading with the part, I might be, trying to insert myself into a conversation. So I feel like I belong more, or I might be trying to say like, oh, well, I do that too. Or do you know what I mean? So rather than just going in a conversation, if I feel triggered, I can go, oh, there's that part of me. I don't even have to say anything. I can say, of course that's there. But these people they're just having a nice conversation about the brunch they went to last week that of course I wasn't invited into because I don't know them that well, and that's okay. It's okay, part of me that feels left out.
Brilliant.
Does that makes sense?
Thanks, Joellen. Is there anything else you'd like to mention?
No, I'm good. We probably went over or something.
Yeah, we're good. Thanks a lot, listeners. Thank you, Joellen.
Thank you, Simon.
Time flies when you're having fun.
All right. Take care. Be well.
Bye.